You know, the Vietnam War is just full of these stunning contradictions. On one hand, you have the United States, the world's biggest superpower, unleashing the most incredible air war in all of history. And yet, it ended in defeat. So let's get right into it and unpack the painful but really powerful lessons of air power in Vietnam. The source material we're looking at really doesn't pull any punches. It frames the war as this profound failure for the United States. And a huge piece of that puzzle, you guessed it, is the massive and, frankly, often misapplied use of air power.
So to really get your head around the scale here, just think about this number: 8 million tons of bombs. That is more than all the bombs dropped by everyone in the entire Second World War, combined, all dropped on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia.
And that, right there, that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. How could you possibly unleash that much power, that much technological muscle from the air, and still not get the job done? Well, the answer is all in the strategy, or lack thereof.
All right, so the first major air campaign, it was called Operation Rolling Thunder. And on paper, it was supposed to be this big show of force, a way to persuade North Vietnam to back off. But right from the get-go, it was built on a really, really flawed idea.
Okay, look at this. This slide is so important because it shows you the huge mismatch in what each side wanted. For North Vietnam, it was simple. It was singular. Unify the country. That's it. But for the US, well, it was a messy mix of kind of vague, shifting goals. We weren't trying to conquer them. We were trying to, persuade them? That creates a massive disconnect between what you're doing in the air and what you're trying to achieve on the ground politically.
And this fuzzy objective led to a strategy they called gradualism. The thinking was, hey, let's just slowly tighten the screws, right? Apply a little pressure here, a little more there, and eventually Hanoi will have to come to the negotiating table. But here's the thing, it did the exact opposite. This slow, predictable approach just gave North Vietnam all the time in the world to adapt, to build up their air defenses, and if anything, it just hardened their will to fight.
And this is where it gets even more frustrating, especially if you were a pilot. They were basically flying with political handcuffs on. I mean, think about it. You've got these critical targets, like the port of Haiphong, where all the war supplies are pouring in, and they're completely off limits. Why? Fear of taking off China or the Soviet Union. It got so bad that President Johnson himself was literally picking targets from the White House, micromanaging the war from halfway across the world. So what did all that get them? This chart pretty much says it all. We're talking over 643,000 tons of bombs. We lost 922 aircraft. I mean, the cost was immense. And what did we get for all that sacrifice? On the big strategic goal? A big fat zero. Rolling Thunder was, by any real measure, a failure. Okay, so while the overall strategy was a mess, something else was happening. The battlefield itself was turning into this high-stakes technological arms race. Yeah, the skies over Vietnam, they basically became the world's deadliest laboratory for a brand new kind of electronic warfare. And the thing that really changed the game was this, the Soviet SA-2 missile. All of a sudden, US planes flying at what used to be a safe medium altitude were just sitting ducks. So the SA-2 forces them to fly lower to get underneath the radar. But guess what's waiting for them down there? A wall of incredibly deadly anti-aircraft fire, what they call flak. So what was the American answer to this new threat? Well, it was one of the gutsiest missions of the entire war, the Wild Weasels. These were crews in special F-105s, and their whole job was to go in first, intentionally get the enemy SAM sites to light them up with radar, and then, bam, use that signal to fire a missile right back at them and take them out. Their motto says it all: first in, last out. I mean, can you imagine? An absolutely terrifying job. And this is how it went. This constant back and forth, this deadly cat and mouse game just kept escalating. The US comes up with jamming pods to try and blind the enemy radar. But then you get this absolutely brilliant move called Operation Bolo. American F-4 fighters basically pretended to be a big, slow bombing formation. They faked the electronic signature, lured the North Vietnamese MiGs into what they thought was an easy kill, and then sprang the trap. The result? A stunning victory. Okay, let's fast forward to 1972. The whole landscape of the war has changed. Most of the American ground troops are heading home. Nixon is president now. And then boom, North Vietnam launches this massive, conventional invasion of the South. No more guerrilla tactics, this was a full-on invasion. And the American response was a totally different kind of air campaign, something called linebacker. And when you compare it to Rolling Thunder, wow, it was just night and day. This time, the handcuffs were off. The military commanders on the ground were actually allowed to pick the targets. That port at Haiphong, mined. Those critical rail lines finally hit. And maybe the biggest difference of all, they unleashed brand new technology with a strategy of decisive, overwhelming force. No more of that slow, gradual stuff.
You know, if you want one symbol for all the frustration of Rolling Thunder, it's gotta be the Thanh Hoa Bridge. They called it the Dragon's Jaw. And for good reason. This thing was built like a fortress. It just seemed indestructible. For years, U.S. pilots flew mission after mission, risking everything, dropping tons of conventional dumb bombs on it. And nothing. They lost so many planes trying to take this one bridge down.
And then, everything changed. A revolution in air power. On May 13, 1972, a small flight of jets, armed with these new things called precision-guided munitions, basically laser-guided smart bombs, did what hundreds of missions before them couldn't. They took down the Dragon's Jaw. In one mission. It was a total game-changer, a watershed moment for air warfare. So later that year, in December of 72, the peace talks stall out. And Nixon, he orders Linebacker 2, what became known as the Christmas bombing. Look, this wasn't about persuasion anymore. This was about brute force. This was pure intimidation. For 11 straight days, a massive fleet of B-52s just relentlessly pounded the area around Hanoi. We're talking a staggering amount of bombs. And you know what? It worked. The sheer, relentless pressure forced the North Vietnamese right back to the negotiating table. So, when the dust settled, what was the real legacy here? The Linebacker campaigns, they were a powerful demonstration of what air power could do when unleashed. But the hard truth is, they came way too late to change the ultimate outcome of the war. The real lasting value came from the lessons, the incredibly hard lessons. And this really gets to the core of it all, doesn't it? Air power, no matter how powerful, how precise it gets, it's still just a tool. Sure, Linebacker was a tactical success. It achieved its short-term goal. But it couldn't magically fix the massive strategic failure that had haunted the American war effort from day one. You can have the best technology in the world, but it can't save you if you don't have a clear, achievable political goal to aim it at.
And these lessons, man, they were written in fire over the skies of Vietnam. And they would go on to completely reshape how the American military thought about war for generations. You have to have a clear objective. That gradual escalation stuff, it's a trap. You have to let your commanders on the ground actually command. And most importantly, never, ever confuse having cool new tech with having a sound strategy.
And this right here is so key. The painful lessons learned in Vietnam directly led to the successes of future conflicts. When you look at the 1991 Gulf War, with its clear objectives, its use of overwhelming force, and all those precision weapons, you're looking at a playbook that was written as a direct response to everything that went wrong in Vietnam. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. Okay, so we learned how to use air power with absolutely devastating precision. No doubt about that. But here's the question. Has that knowledge actually stopped us from getting bogged down in these long, messy wars? Or has it just made us, well, more efficient at fighting them? And that's a question that I think is still very much up for debate today.